Anyway, my name's Daniel Morrison Neal. So I am this is me. So I'm a composer and sound designer. So I write a lot of music and such. I work for studios where I do like dubbing, mixing for films and such. I also work for School of Innovation Technology at the Glasgow School of Art. We have a wee booth over there and I have my lanyard, so I'm representing as well. We can come over there if you want to have a little chat as well. But mainly the kind of branch that this is all going from is the kind of Fallout London side, where I worked on that project as one of the leads of department, and we've now recently just made a company from that, which is Team Folon, which is originally a shortened version of Fallout London that turned into Folon, but we've now devised that that's going to be called For Our Love of Nostalgia. So that's what that's kind of now getting called. Okay, so for this, I just want to talk a little bit about video game mods for those that maybe don't know what those are. I imagine quite a lot of you already do. And then just chatting a little bit about how video game mods are like a great way of sense of community building, but also I offer a kind of different angle of video game development that might not be generally represented or pushed for in terms of like institutions or such, which is quite different. So we were thinking about things like video game mods. We have this kind of wide spectrum of things which could be just alterations to the game. It could be refinements to it. It's something which is very much community driven. Some people will play a game and think, this could be better if I put something like this in it, or if I change the skins of something. It could be a complete overhaul of a story, or it could be additional levels, a DLC-like expansion, or a total conversion. So something like Fallout London goes over in the kind of total conversion kind of side, whereas you might think of things like rebalancements or refinements over at the other side. So it can be as big or as small as you want, but essentially you're breaking the game apart, learning how it works, and then you're figuring out what you could add or subtract to that because you're always working with a pre-existing game. But there is something which is quite punk about this approach to working to it, because you're breaking things apart. And I think one of the kind of big things about video game mods is you don't have any kind of stakeholders which are, you know, saying you have to cut budgets here, you have to, especially if there's any audio people, there's a lot that goes into the kind of ideas of, oh, we can't have songs that big, we need to crunch it and compress it and everything. You don't have those kind of restrictions, and there's something quite punk about the community behind all of that. And I kind of think of that as this kind of permissionless creativity where you can pretty much do whatever you want to a game, and you can just deconstruct it and put anything that you want into it. But some of these things do start as mods first, and then they turn into games, or they potentially turn into actual game companies, like in our little case. So in terms of like Half-Life 2, for the Stanley Parable, this was an initial game mod, but something which is quite a secret about this thing, because I do know that for a lot of people, the people that work in the kind of games industry, the people that get the most kind of attention, not in a kind of positive or kind of negative sense, might be your people like your 3D modelers, your animators, your level designers. But then there's kind of things like writers, quest designers. That's quite a difficult angle to start getting into game development with, because you already have to have this framework to be able to make a game before you start actually working out the logic of how a lot of it works. Whereas something like this, it is purely a narrative-driven modification, or as it is a game now. But in terms of the actual level design of it, it's quite overall simple. A lot of it is just logic where you walk to a specific location, a piece of dialogue plays, and there's a lot of power in that, being able to actually develop a narrative and actually work on your skills and being able to develop logic within a video game. And I think a mod is a really good kind of platform to learn those kind of skills for sure. And of course that turned into the Stanley Parable. Another one which we're in touch with a little bit with things is the Forgotten City, which was a mod for Skyrim, if anybody has heard of that. And that is one of the kind of same things where a lot of the folk who worked on that, there was a lot of story involved with that, many different characters and branching narratives. And because it was based on the Bethesda Creation Kit, it gave people a lot of autonomy to be able to exercise their skills and being able to do that. But from this, they were able to create a full-fledged game with that and gathered funding. And really, really lovely folk. And the game won awards as well. One of my personal favourites, though, is probably Pokémon, the kind of modding, ROM hacking scene of that, if anybody's interested in that. I think the culture surrounding everything with that is really interesting, just because lots of people have grown up with Pokemon, and maybe if you might be a little bit like me, you know all the different Pokemon types, you know exactly how the game works inside out, you've broken it apart, and you really want something that's a little bit more of a challenge, something that really kind of pushes things forward and kind of goes away from the kind of normal structure that Pokemon games have and turns into something like Emerald Rogue, which is a, a Pokemon roguelike game where it just works on your skills and knowing everything about Pokemon. If you don't play Pokemon and play Pokemon Rogue, it's probably going to be the worst game you've ever played because none of it makes any sense. Because it's all just based on your skills and knowledge that you've worked on from that. But there is another kind of angle which I think is interesting in terms of like skill building for developing games, and certainly for us it was one of the most important things, which is this idea that when you're working with a pre-established franchise or a game which is fully complete, you're working with something which I would kind of think of as like the aesthetics of difference and change between things. You're creating something which is additive to a game or subtracting it. Seeing what happens if you cut a quest out, does that change how that works? If you add a kind of side quest off to the side, maybe it actually breaks the actual core game itself. And I'd say for a lot of people in Fallout London, this was actually one of the main things that we learned when working with this. Because there's loads of things like the skills in terms of like kit bashing stuff or developing what was the whole of London, inspired by Google Maps, thanks Google Maps. But using all of these professional assets which already existed and knowing that this framework existed, and there was something really exciting by taking something that you'd played to death and then reconstructing something completely new from that, which I think is one of the kind of really powerful points of this. It also allowed us, because it was taking Fallout out of America and then putting it completely in London, lots of us have British or Scottish or, you know, English kind of humour, which was all enforced within the game. So we would just, there was one writer in particular who loved EastEnders and just took one of the episodes, says, right, I'm going to create a whole narrative cycle that's just the EastEnders, where, you know, this person is, you know, in a relationship with that person, but then not this, and then there's an argument of who child's which and everything. But you know, in a kind of traditional sense of making a narrative for a game, that's hard to pitch because you have to say, oh, there's so much work to do. But actually allowed a bit of experimentation for that because you can plot the characters everywhere, do some of the initial testing for it, and it was actually really funny. And we thought, we'll just keep that. But there's less kind of risk with all of that, and a lot of it was really creatively free, which I think is one of the really good things for that. Especially for me with stuff. Does anybody know who this amazing person is? Sorry? Wendy Carlos. Not Wendy Carlos. Delia Derbyshire. So the person that wrote the theme for Doctor Who way back then. Because there's a rich history in British culture of like synthesized music and sound as well. And that allowed me to kind of exercise my ability to kind of insert that within the score. Also taking reference to like Mark Morgan from the original kind of Fallout games as well. But in other kind of contexts, the game that we're working on at the moment, I'm already feeling I don't have that freedom of difference or change and seeing how things kind of feel a bit different in that world. And it flourishes because it's no longer Fallout. This is Fallout London. Just kind of things to think about. Yeah, but with that kind of sound point, Fallout does have inspiration directly from the Protect and Survive series, which was an absolutely awful amount of videos. Have people seen this? So people know about this. Which were just terrifying about, you know, how to, if a member of family dies, how to put them in a body bag during nuclear war and things like that. And these were all things that were publicised and developed. But the sound design for it is just mortifying with some of it. We'll see if this is going to play through here, but if it doesn't, we'll test that out as well. Maybe it's not. Nope. So that's not protect and survive. This is. And everything about that is, from a musical standpoint, just wrong as well. Whenever I was playing, and I had to work it out from ear, and I played it very slowly because we had to make a kind of new version of it. I thought, this is awful. Who came up with this? This is just a dreadful sound. But then putting that with stuff to do with what we were doing, just having the kind of alchemy of all of these parts of culture kind of meld together in something that was pre-existing gave that initial excitement of saying, we're altering Fallout and we're making it kind of London. So you hear the kind of same theme also within here, but like my kind of little rendition of it as well. But you know, from a sound designer kind of perspective, giving something like this to somebody to work on actually felt really exciting. You weren't starting from nothing. You could pull things from lots of other stuff and say, what was the original game inspired for? How can we make it more London based? Just essentially there's a lot of excitement involved with all of that. So with, yeah, this is kind of adding on to the kind of extra part where we did insert a lot of stuff, but with a lot of the kind of music kind of side, so I composed, I don't know, about 75% of the music or anything in that. I don't know if anybody has listened to the music from Fallout London, have you? A wee bit? You can listen to it if you want. I quite enjoyed it, but working for this project, I had complete free reign over everything that I could do with it, and because it was a mod, there was absolutely no danger as to what ramifications it might have in terms of like development and such. So there was something that was risk free. I think I made 70 pieces of music because I just couldn't stop and just kept making stuff and saying this could go here, that could go there. And it was something that wasn't bound by something like a Gantt chart, for example, and saying we have these kind of targets. We did have to release at some point and it was like slightly late, but that wasn't because of me composing too much. But my kind of point with all of this is it's just fun, and you can experiment with that. There's pieces of music for people who are involved with music. There's things in it which are like in 5/4, 7/4. There's things that I wouldn't do usually whenever I've worked for other things, doing like film for music for films or such. I don't want to take that risk because I'm getting paid for these things. I have a set amount of time for it. And there was so many times sitting down, I thought, do you know what? I fancy writing something in 7/4. And I took the rhythm from Unsquare Dance from Dave Brubeck, but then pushed it forward by a beat and then composed a piece from it. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't actually think of these kind of things because I've obligations to fulfill in order to get paid. Whereas something like this, as everybody was having fun, putting things like EastEnders in it, taking my inspiration from Delia Derbyshire, making things in barmy time signatures, level designers that had this big pool of stuff already to work with and just mash it all together. So in my kind of case, I would say if you aren't involved with game dev, the creation kit is quite a fun thing to get going with because everything's already there. You can get everything out of it and then start getting working on stuff. But something that this did teach us with a lot of things is project management was really important for it because as it kind of grew arms and legs, we realized that we had to be really structured with everything. But all of that was kind of all set with this. And this game engine had a lot of limitations to it. And it meant that we had to work together in a team, which is extremely important for, you know, carrying things professionally into your life. Because a lot of things that I'd maybe say isn't really spoken about when it comes to game development. Of course, do game jams, work in teams, have like teams of 5 or 6, do as much as you want. Fallout London had, I think, about 80 people working on it and 120 voice actors. And that needed managed, but everybody that was in the project learned about communication skills. You could do everything you want in terms of being able to kit bash things amazingly or being able to model things, but communication is such an important factor. And because a lot of this is all asynchronous and online where we're all working at different times and using Discord, communication was so important. And certainly earlier on in development when things were just getting attached saying, here's my FBX file. It's like, we need more information. All right, we probably should have a framework of this. So like smaller teams maybe don't need to have that, but certainly something like this, it taught us how much like management was a big factor. And because it's volunteer led as well, you have people which are coming in at different times. So it's a different angle of development, which is totally different, which I think we really enjoyed quite a lot with everything. Also, the creation kit has its wee kind of eccentricity kind of points as well. I don't know if people know about Fallout 3 where they couldn't get any locomotive vehicles kind of working. So the kind of way of getting that to work was to put my NPC with a train as a hat. And that was the closest that they could get to it. But we wouldn't have learned that if we hadn't like broken these things apart. And looking at things like this, we finally realised, oh, actually, this is okay. We can kind of do this as well, you know. And it felt quite empowering to do things like that and do whatever you want. But for us with things, because I want to go to Q&A if you do have any questions. If you don't, that's all grand as well. Fallout London was something which was really punk in how we went about it. If you search up things online, there's a lot of silliness surrounding the whole thing because it completely blew up. We had the BBC eyes on us and everything. Like the kind of joke that I usually say about all of this, and gladfully didn't put me in our interviews, was we were literally sitting in our flats in our underpants working on a mod, but now the BBC's want to interview us and all of these kind of things, you know, going, what's going on? So it was quite a big challenge with all of that. But then as things moved towards the end of development, we're thinking, do you know, we've learned so much about managing people, communicating with folk, organising things together. So then we actually kind of built a company out of that afterwards, which we're now running now, and it's been running for 11 months now. And you know, I think probably the time that I spent on modding things was one of the most valuable things on top of doing anything working with colleagues or working with friends or anything like that, making kind of shorter form things. But this actually showed us how to manage things at such a kind of macro level all over the place and try to gather everything, because it was very difficult to try and get the game engine to work in the first place kind of thing. So taking from that actually made sense to make a company, and really I couldn't be happier with it, to be honest. Kind of main kind of point for this overall, this big rambling for all of you, is don't be afraid. If you haven't done anything to do with games, just have a go at breaking things apart. I don't think we give ourselves enough time to break things, examine things that are broken, figure out how things work. We're always kind of thinking about, you know, putting things on ArtStation, make sure portfolio's nice, all of these kind of things, but actually working with people, breaking things apart, seeing how things slot together and say, what happens if I move that apart and put something here and work with it? And I think that's probably one of the most valuable things that you can get from this. That's everything I have. Is there anything for Q&A?